I can't see it here. All right. So everybody, there's a recording. You'll get the slides afterwards. So welcome. And thank you very, very much for joining. If you're joining for the first time, massive thank you. If you come back, double massive thank you, because, you know, you've done one and you might have just gone, I don't have time for this. Right. But hopefully what we covered last week has helped or resonated or had an effect on kind of extending the impact you can have in the way that you're thinking about the things that we think about. So those who weren't here last week, I'm Sally Dominguez. I'm an architect and an inventor, entrepreneur, but most of my work now is on future strategy for big companies and small and education organizations like across the world. And that's because I'm a specialist in fourth revolution thinking. So fourth revolution, the reason the world is in massive disruption, is all about the rise of machine intelligence and the rise of exponential technologies. And my expertise is in the human response to that. So if artificial intelligence can predict, analyze, run statistics, and spot behavioral changes more than 20 times faster than the best human brain, what does that leave for us? And what that leaves for us is thinking creatively and harnessing all of those amazing digital tools and tools that are out there right now, more accessible than ever, more affordable than ever. Harnessing those to dream up schemes and systems and products and services with greater impact, and then enables us to deliver at scale with a speediness that we've never been able to either. So I'm going to share my slides. This week, here it comes. This week is sideways thinking, which is all about biases and preferences and systems for getting around those. So let me play a slideshow. So we're going to have a couple of breakout groups. We're actually going to stick kind of to our breakout rooms from last week, but we have some new people. So this will freshen it up. But this is such a different aspect to the negative space that we covered last week that we decided we'd keep you all in the groups that you're in. So please welcome any new people into the groups. And actually, our first breakout piece is going to be super useful for those new people, because I just want to do a 5-minute recap with all of you on negative space. And I can't let Amanda in. Oh, one of you two, Lakila, you'll let Amanda in, won't you? She's just popped up on my screen. So last week we talked about the analogy of the waiting room as the most useful way to remind us of all the negative space opportunities. And for those who weren't with me last week, negative space sounds negative, but it's not. It's a myriad of opportunities to have greater impact and to rethink some of the systems and services that we deliver to make them more inclusive and more effective, more robust. So when we think of ourselves in the waiting room, we like to think of ourselves as extremely healthy in a room full of extremely sick people, right? So when that happens, we have a variety of different spaces. We have real physical space, the distance between us and the people around us. We have emotional space, which is the distance it feels like. Usually if we're healthy and they're sick, we feel like they're too close, regardless of the actual space. We have the time that we actually wait, real time, and we have perceived time, which is usually if we're healthy and they're sick and they're all coughing and spluttering, then we want to get out there faster. Therefore, we feel like we've waited for longer. There's communication time, what didn't get said and why, and how frustrated we feel from that. So emotional time is the time we spend dissatisfied or unhappy, either when we're delivering a service or a product or when we're receiving. So these are all time opportunities, space opportunities that we can think about, the ones we don't normally go to, the ones we don't focus on. We can think about them in different ways. And one of my favorite examples, probably because I'm an architect and I'm a sustainability person, is green roofs. So green roofs, actually, about, I think 12 years ago, Chicago City mandated that 10% of their buildings in the city had to have green roof space. And that actually dropped the urban heat of the city by 2 degrees. So green roof is an amazing example of negative space. So you consider that the roof of most buildings, when they're flat, right, they're covered in messy stuff like elevator overruns, electricity, all the sort of kind of utility stuff, right? They're also usually painted white to reflect heat, which means that they actually reflect glare into any building around them that's higher than that roof. Right, so when you put a green roof on a building, not only do you hold the heat in and insulate the building with the thickness of the vegetation. You can filter the grey water from a building and actually process water from showers and water from taps and make it usable again for toilet flush. But you also prevent glare from the other buildings. So you make the amenity for the buildings around you better. You make the view from the buildings around you better, and you deliver amenity to the people in the building, because suddenly they can go up the top and in the middle of a city, they can be surrounded by nature. They can grow things. So I think a green roof is just an amazing example of the use of negative space. And another one that I used to use all the time, but I didn't bring it up this time because you all live in Detroit, and I've only visited Detroit in winter about 5 times for the car shows, is a lot. Now, is it blotting? We called it blotting, right? So when a bunch of people moved out of houses and some of the utilities were shut down, people were given that opportunity, that once off, to expand their plot of land to the adjacent as long as they were upkeeping it. And then they believe that that got put into law. That used to be an amazing example of negative space that I used to use in my Stanford classes, because I thought that this was so progressive that you would allow people to take neighboring blocks of land if they were using it for vegetable production or any kind of production, rather than letting it lie there disused and gathering dust. Anyway, that's your example. But what I would love you all to do is pop into your breakout groups and just refresh each other on possibly what you took from last week in terms of negative space, the most useful aspect of negative space for you in the work that you're doing. So before I pop you into those breakout groups, is everyone clear on what I'm talking about? Does anyone want to share anything that they applied from last week or they took from last week, or shall I just send you into your groups? You would just unmute if you want to talk to me. Check the chat. Okay, I'm going to send you into the groups. Those who weren't here last week can have negative space explained to them by those who were here last week. So whip into the groups. We've just got 5 minutes. If any of those systems gave you a bit of an aha moment, I would love for you to take this opportunity to share it with your people. And then when we come back, hopefully a couple of you will share what you've learned, what you've heard. All right, so let's go. Shanae, are we ready into the groups?
Yep, I'm about to open them right now.
Awesome. Okay, into the groups. I'll see you back here in 5.
And if anyone has any trouble getting to their group, please just let us know. Okay, there should be open.
Hear anything or share anything interesting that were not interesting? That's a lot of pressure. Did anyone hear or share anything with some impact from last week that they were able to apply to the work they're doing? I'd love for 1 or 2 people to share with me. Just unmute yourselves if yes. No, is it too early to share? No one's unmuted. Anyone from any of the groups here, anything interesting? You did. Doesn't matter. We're going to push forward with sideways, and we'll do a bit of a share out after the next activity. Unless am I too fast and somebody did actually unmute? No. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's hit sideways. So this week, we're going to talk about sideways thinking. Thinking sideways is about trying to sidestep around the preferences as well as the implicit bias that we carry with us. Now, we all know, because all of you are schooled in implicit bias, of course, such a big topic right now that you can't, in fact, ditch your implicit bias. But you can be really aware of it. And there are certain little workarounds we can use. So first of all, there are various aspects of this concept of thinking harder about ourselves, the biases and preferences we might have, and the people we're serving and the people we're working with. So we're going to kind of divvy it up into various areas. And I'd like to start with all of you. So it's really important to be aware of how you approach life. I'm a ridiculous optimist. So as a ridiculous optimist, it's also an inventor and an entrepreneur. I have to be very careful that I don't overestimate how good something I thought I was going to be and how successful it's going to be, or I will throw crazy amounts of effort and time and maybe money into it. So like the first awareness you need is, are you an optimist, or are you a little pessimistic or cynical? In which case, that's cool too. Very important to know that, to know what you're bringing to your team in terms of reality, optimism, balance, playing the devil's advocate, anything else. So I don't know whether can I do a show of hands on here? Who, just give me jazz hands actually. So jazz hands if you're generally consider yourself a bit of an optimist like me. A bit optimistic. I love jazz hands. It just makes you feel good. Whoop, whoop. All right. Jazz hands if you feel like you're constantly the devil's advocate, giving the other point of view to try and balance the crazy optimists. Who's a balancing? Got a bit of jazz. Or jazz hands if you feel like you're actually a super realist and you might have an element of pessimism, but it's helping everybody calm the hell down. I can't see everybody, so I can't see if I got any for that. Did I get a few for that?
Yep, you've got a few. Some people threw up some reaction.
Right. So it's super important to be very self-aware. I mean, generally, it's super important to be very self-aware. Now, the next piece is this. How do we like to receive our information? And how much of the way we like to receive our information do we assume about others? And I think what's super interesting at this point in time, just a quick note to Shanae and Lakila, I can't read the chat when I'm presenting. So if you keep an eye on the chat, if there's a question or a reason I need to stop, just let me know. Okay, because I just noticed it's coming in, right? So I'm just like, ugh. All right. So I think what's super interesting is in the under 30s, we're now, and particularly the under 25s, Gen Z, we're seeing a real switch in the way people prefer to receive their information. We're seeing a huge rise in and it actually seems to be very related to ADHD. I'm not sure how many of you are diagnosed ADHD. I am wicked ADHD, but like in my line of work, it's actually pretty helpful most of the time, right? Most people have always preferred their information visually. And this is why most of us find an infographic, a good infographic, so delightful because it tells a story more in pictures than words. It's more accessible to people who perhaps can't hear or people from a different language, different background, and it's accessible across ages. But what's interesting is the under 25s are less interested than any generation ever has been in a visual learning style of visual communication, and they're extremely interested in a fully immersive kinesthetic, which is in learning by doing. So if we're communicating remotely by doing, we're talking about still visual often, usually a YouTube or a video. We're talking about a different style to our classic infographic. We have new generations coming through who are on YouTube nonstop for learning, right? So if we're trying to communicate and we're used to static posters and things like that, perhaps we want to wrap that into an included animation or something that actually has someone holding up the poster and talking about it in a video clip in order to appeal to a wider range of people. It's also interesting that we've always, generally the older generations, been pretty open to auditory. And this is an interesting stat because it kind of contrasts with the rise of podcasts. Like, so a bunch of people across range, but particularly Gen Z, listen to podcasts nonstop. But if you analyze the kind of podcasts they're listening to, they're often chatty podcasts that are taking an element of something. They're often podcasts that are talking about another podcast, podcasts that are talking about another real crime podcast or another news article or somebody else talking about gossip. So you get this weird meta thing where people are repeating information, maybe third or fourth hand. It's kind of a really interesting phenomenon on the auditory. But back to communication. So it's interesting to know how you like to receive your information and how the people around you, your teammates, and the people you serve like to have their information served to them. So if you're polling the recipients of whatever it is you do, whatever you deliver, do you poll them on how they like to get things? Do they like visuals? Do they prefer videos? Do they like to listen, as well as the frequency to which they like to get it? And it's an interesting one because often when we're constructing a service or a communication campaign, we use our preference to guide us on what we think everybody else wants. But I think it's really important to be aware of this pretty large shift in what people are looking for in their communication, for basic information, and particularly news and facts and fact checking. So that takes us to the next piece. This is one of my favorite artworks. And I realized last night when I was reviewing this that I have dropped the artist's name off this. So I'm going to find the artist's name and post the whole series on our LinkedIn group. For those of you who are not on the LinkedIn group, we have a LinkedIn group. I'm pretty much the only person posting on the group right now, but we have the slides from the session as well as a bunch of other articles. So this was an artist. She was working about 12 years ago now. She sent her photo out to 30 different Photoshop experts in 30 different countries. And she said, I just want you to make me beautiful. So use Photoshop to turn me into your ideal of female beauty. And this is just a sampling of what she got back from the various countries. And I think what's really interesting about this is how the subtle differences in expectations around beauty, and of course, this is one person in one country, but look at the subtle differences. So if we're creating a campaign that we think is visually appealing, is beautiful, is peaceful, whatever it is to us, it's good to know that in fact, depending on other cultural implications, that may not be the most appealing thing to other people. And so again, when we're trying to work out how we deliver, we need to remember what it is we think is good and then attempt to get around that. What might other people be looking for? What might be offensive to other people? What might be thought-provoking to other people that we just take as standard? And what might be taboo that we think is totally okay? And to that point, I want to address a couple of the common biases. I mean, I'm an immigrant to this country, I'm Australian, and you would think that my culture and your culture are very similar, but there are some stark differences that I have found firsthand. So I'm going to share one of them with you in a second. Here it is. Right. So we moved to the USA. One of our lovely neighbors says, come over for a pool party. My husband is a semi-professional ultramarathon swimmer. He's been swimming forever, right? We're both volunteer lifesavers at the beach. So we roll to the party and I throw him his Speedos across the thing. And the host, and he goes and puts them on and comes out. And the hostess runs up to me and she goes, my parents are here. And I said, what, is there a problem? She goes, he can't wear them. I'm like, I don't understand. And she goes, he cannot wear those obscene swimsuits in front of my parents. And as Australians, we actually didn't understand that for vast areas of the USA, you wear swim trunks. You do not wear little tiny race pants. And so here we have a photo of the old men at Bondi Beach. These are all lifesavers. I've worked with a bunch of them. This is how we kind of cruise around on our beaches and at our swimming pools. And yet it wasn't until we moved here that we realized that for many, many people, the Speedo has completely different connotations and sometimes is kind of offensive. Who knew? So it's interesting. It's like if you think that you're creating a campaign that appeals, tugs on the heartstrings of people and you've got like a cute, fluffy puppy. It probably resonates with most of America, but it would not resonate in parts of Southeast Asia at all. And it would not resonate in much of Arab world. Because the connotation of the fluffy dog is completely different in different areas of the world. So it's really important to stop for a second and think about whether we've put our own cultural bias and cultural expectation onto a campaign or a service that we're providing. Another great example is age bias. And this has never really been more relevant than we've now got this new generation that is so different to so many of us. Many of you who have kids in the under 25 category know what I'm talking about. Digital natives for the first time, a very different way of creating and corresponding with the world. So about 15 years ago, Ford realized that they had a mismatch between their typical customer who was in their 40s and their typical car designer who was a boy in their mid-20s. So they realized that there were a lot of design elements happening that just didn't fit the customer. So they created the third age suit, which is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. So when you put on this suit, it simulates glaucoma, so impaired vision, impaired movement. It locks up arms, it locks up neck movement, it locks up some back movement. So the people that are way younger can actually feel the restrictions and maybe some of the emotional restriction that comes with that kind of aging and that kind of limitation. It had a huge effect on the way seats were designed, on the distance between the steering wheel and the pedals, and all sorts of other things that really, you know, if you're young and fit and agile and you're designing for a much older generation, there's no way you can intuitively know some of those limitations. So the third age seat, super, super interesting. And the final piece, this is one of my favorite ad campaigns. Okay, here is a gun safety campaign, one of my favorites. These guys, you know, obviously in a culture where guns are pretty normal, which again, as an immigrant, it's very hard to understand, but it's my new country, so I'm just going with it. This was designed to shock people and remind people that just as some of these taboo things looked so out of place in the hands of children, so too did guns. So this is one of my favorite ones, is if they find it, they'll play with it. And they had it with sex toys, and they had it with condoms blowing up into balloons and all sorts of other things that were designed to shock people into thinking twice about whether the guns they had at home were actually safe. Right, so what I'd love you to do on your own is just consider one of the services that you deliver and the way that it currently delivers, and stop for a moment to think about some of the assumptions that helped develop and finalize the decisions made around how the service would look. So what are the assumptions that you made about the recipient's preferences? What are some of the assumptions you made about what medium it is that you deliver this service or this communication method, whatever it is? And whether you ever asked about those people's preferences or that person's preferences. So if you just run through this quick list with just one service in mind, and it really doesn't matter which one, it's just a stop and a checklist to help us think in a slightly different way about some of the stuff that we take for granted. Just give you 2 minutes on that, and we can have a little share. And if anyone wants to unmute and comment on anything or ask anything, I'm totally available while you're doing that. And I know it's a tricky one. I mean, you know, this was the kind of the thorny issue that when I was discussing this series with COACT, we were like, we want to bring people together. We want open idea sharing. We want people from different areas, government, not-for-profit, philanthropy, students, everybody to come together and have open idea sharing. On the other hand, a lot of my adventurous thinking strategy relies on us looking for negative pieces in order to address things in different ways and then enhance ultimately what we have. So it's always tricky when I say, oh, like, can you share with me what you've just revealed about your service or your thing that maybe you could improve? I know that's a really tricky one when you may be actually facing, albeit remotely, a funder or a potential philanthropist or a potential recipient, right? However, if we all understand that it's simply sharing to make things better, has anyone going through this checklist realized that perhaps they made an assumption that they could have dug further into before finalizing a good or a service? You'd have to unmute though.
I also want to uplift in the chat too, Sally, and please feel free, one of you have a response to unmute after. But in the chat, there was also from Amanda, we asked our participants if they wanted to go back in person, and we were surprised to see that the majority preferred virtual or didn't care. Just want to uplift her comment in regards to the conversation.
So interesting. It's so interesting because I got so zoomed out, and I was mainly presenting. I got so zoomed out that I started saying no to virtual. Shanae knows, because when I said to Kylo and Shanae, nope, I don't want to do it. I want to be there in person. Because my preference is in person. I've had COVID. It was really horrible, but I'm vaxxed, and I figured that like I could come through and I could survive a couple of days of sickness, whatever, without realizing, I guess, really considering and respecting the level of fear and the level of safety people feel in virtual. And it wasn't until I pushed myself through this lens and just went, that's kind of selfish, because I'm super healthy and super fit, and I don't have any underlying issues except a bit of pancreatitis. So really, I'm fine. And there are so many people that I work with that either are with vulnerable people or are vulnerable people who are so much more comfortable with virtual. So it's an interesting one. Thank you for sharing that, Shanae. Because I will say, in person, people are so happy to be in person. It's crazy. But then you get that weird thing where half the people are in masks, half of them aren't. And there's immediately kind of a weird unspoken division, which is unpleasant because you don't want a division in a room. So that's an interesting one. Has anyone got a little insight on something they're doing where they may have just assumed something that could take deeper kind of digging in?
Sally, this is Cheryl P. Johnson from COTS, and I was thinking about this, and hopefully it connects as I'm thinking about, we've been focusing primarily with families, right? So moving families out of poverty. Now, when we think about families, most people think about mom and child. And one of the things that was a big miss for us that we're now correcting is when we have a dad that comes in, like we're seeing more dads with moms or dads without moms with kids. Like, he doesn't see any kind of communication that says this service is for him. And in fact, it is for him. So we're working at ways to correct that kind of assumption that it's not just about, when we think of families consist of everybody, and we've got to make sure that we are communicating that in a way that they feel included.
That's so interesting. Thank you, Cheryl. Like, I absolutely agree. And it's interesting, if you look at millennial statistics globally, who are the under, what are they now, 37 or something? What's interesting is only half of that crazy number of people in the world have a partner. And so family extends even more to, is it a child and a parent, like a grown child and a parent and a child? Or is it a friend group that have come together? And I know locally here, we have a lot of LGBTQ, specifically trans kids, who have been kicked out of their home. I have one friend who has 2 trans kids who has taken in a bunch of them and now has this essentially this expanded family. They consider themselves family, right? And so how in an era where the classic nuclear family is kind of blown apart, what is family if we truly want to help tight community groups out of poverty? And I think that point about the dads is so valid. And then it expands even further. What is family if it's a group that feels bonded like that, but it's not through blood? It's a great one. Thank you. Anybody else got anything to add on that kind of assumptions and flipping? Okay, I'm going to push to the next piece. And the next piece is super interesting. Like, this is one of my biggest feedback pieces when I run my Stanford weekend workshops. And hopefully at some point next year, I'll come to Detroit and we can run a Myers-Briggs inversion with a bunch of you, because it's so much fun. This is about quick show of hands. Give me jazz hands. How many people have done their Myers-Briggs profile, either professionally or online? And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Myers-Briggs is really interesting. It's a preference indicator. It was developed by mother and daughter, in fact, to send women into the workforce for the first time in the USA post World War II. I'm going to say World War II, I might be wrong. Right, so it was women developed for initially women to kind of work out what your preferences were for receiving information, what your preferences were for communication, what your preferences generally were, and in amongst all of those preferences was your tendency more extroverted or introverted? Now, most people will self-identify as one or the other. And of course, there are people who flip in the middle. I have one of them in my family who sometimes are very extroverted, sometimes need time alone. Maybe I'm one of them. No, I'm an extrovert. Anyway, what's super interesting is, even though there's a lot of kind of debunking around introvert and extrovert, it is proven that the brain works differently depending on whether you're a more extroverted or an introverted thinker, in that extroverted thinkers thrive on dopamine, instant doses of happiness, right? At great levels. Introverts do not thrive on dopamine, and in fact can be repelled by dopamine. So I am a massive extrovert, as you can see, although I've been working on actually being more introverted because it's so valuable. My mother is an introvert. Apparently, I repel my mother. And so in order to, she says my energy is too great, it's upsetting her, she just wants to back away. And it's taken me up until like this age of 52, but I probably hit it at 50, to work out that if I need to communicate with my mum for any length of time, I need to calm so far down that I almost feel like I'm barely moving, and communicate at a level that does not exude energy, optimism, or dopamine, in order for her to listen and not be completely repelled into a corner. So when we look at extroverts and introverts in our team, what we need to know is that introverted way of thinking is incredibly valuable and runs through different chemicals and a different part of the brain to extrovert. So whilst extroverts are great at quick brainstorm, quick thinking, tons of ideas in the moment, thriving on dopamine, introverts have a thinking process that runs through memory and meaning, uses chlorine, anyway, different chemical, right? And is extremely valuable. So if you've read the book Quiet or any of the like slow thinking books that are out there, most of us don't get the full advantage of the introvert thinking that is around us and in our teams, because brainstorming activities, meetings, and everything else are geared towards extrovert. They're all about time management. They're all about being quick and getting out of there fast. And that means we are missing extremely valuable input from about 50% of the world. So down here later, there's a link to an online if you want to do your Myers-Briggs. But essentially, the way we function is extremely different. And so it's really important. And I will just add this, that many people think that introverts are shy. I think you will find that if you talk to an introvert, generally, an introvert in a meeting is like, that loudmouth is hogging all the time. I don't have time for this. I'm just checking out. I'll check my phone. I'll do something else. People aren't not speaking because they're shy necessarily. They're often not speaking because their input is not being valued by the extrovert stopping and allowing them space to say what they want to say. But similarly, we're also not allowing space with the knowledge that an introvert thinking literally takes longer to come out with extremely meaningful input. And so what I would love you all to think about is, how do we restructure some of our internal processes, as well as perhaps some of our outreach, understanding that 50% of the population think at a different rate and have an extremely valuable input to give to us if time is allowed for them to actually think through what they've been asked to think about. So the quick brainstorm is not going to give you full spectrum input from your entire team. What is it we can do to actually ensure that we're getting full input from the introverts with their incredible thinking, as well as the extroverts? And I'll just share with you that in the last, I'm going to say 8 years since I started researching this and practicing it with my Myers-Briggs inversion in my workshops, I now speak way less than I used to in meetings. And I usually try and stop saying the first thing that comes into my head and wait. Because most of us, extroverts particularly, are waiting to speak instead of stopping and listening. And if you stop and listen as an extrovert, it's incredibly valuable. Because A, you realize you have so many ideas, you actually don't have to share them all. And B, you realize that if you stop and listen, you can build upon someone else's insight and be incredibly effective, maybe more effective than just jamming out everything that's going through your head in real time. So what I'd love to do is pop you into breakout groups. And this time, I'd love you to share whether you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert, and how within your organization, within what you deliver, within your internal team communications and processes, you could accommodate properly introvert thinking with its longer time span and time requirement. And I would particularly love the groups to allow their introverts to give them input on how that new interaction might work. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do this, and then I'm hoping that you'll all share what you found when we pop back out. So take it away. Thank you.
Right, and we just opened the room, so everyone should be able to join right now. If you have any problems, please let us know. And the intention is for you to go back into the room with the people you were before, but there were a few people that joined later, so you may have a few familiar faces and new faces in the room.
All right, how did we go? So we Shanae, Lakila, and I were just discussing how there's this, leaders are not all extroverts. There used to be this kind of perception that leaders were extroverts, the biggest person in the room, which is really a hangover from a much earlier time when your leaders were generally big, loud dudes, white dudes. In Neanderthal times when the biggest person in the room literally was the strongest and the loudest. And I think not only has society embraced leaders who lead from behind and lead with hope and not just with control and power, but also I think digitization means that our outreach is different, and leadership isn't about overpowering. Leadership is about inspiring in its many forms. And so these different kinds of thinking are incredibly inspirational, and the kind of empathy that comes with not being the first person always to speak is massive. And as I just dropped in a few rooms where I heard various people saying, I'm trying to listen more, which is, I feel you, man, because I'm trying to listen more all the time. It's a massive step, right? When you stop as an extrovert, you stop and say, I'm just going to listen for the first 10 minutes instead of be the one with the big idea. And it is fun having big ideas, but you can actually sit on it and decide whether it's actually appropriate and an addition. So who can share with me some of the stuff that they discussed in their groups that would give the rest of us some insight? But you'll have to unmute.
I can talk about what we talked about in my group. We discussed at first just trying to figure out whether we were extroverted or introverted, and just how COVID also kind of made people more aware of, okay, yes, I was an introvert, but maybe the line of work that I'm working in or the type of people that I'm working with required for someone to be an extrovert. And so most of the people in the group were introverted, now kind of becoming extroverted. And I just shared similar thoughts to you, Sally, where I had to learn how to be an introvert, where it was like I was getting in trouble all the time. So just, again, even in the industry that you're working in, you kind of have to be more aware of what's around you and for lack of a better word, just read the room and figure out, okay, what do I be more extroverted here, or do I be more introverted? And then we also talked about, as leaders in any organizations, just also being aware of any individuals that we're working with who are I can't remember the word that someone used in the group, if someone does have ADHD, just how to navigate that
neuroatypical. Yeah.
Yes. And how now a lot of organizations are having trainings for not only upper management, but people in lower teams, how to navigate working with a team member like that, or having to navigate working with the boss who is I don't want to say a challenge, because that's not really the right word.
No, well, there's a lot of people on the spectrum. right?
Yes,
We're working a lot with
exactly,
people on the
exactly.
spectrum who have very interesting ways of communicating. Their
Right.
brain, by being neuroatypical,
Mhm.
is giving us incredible insights. They're capable of incredible work. But if we treat everybody as an expectation of being neurotypical, we miss like all that nuance that actually gives us much more insight and much more value.
Right.
I totally feel you on that. Thank you. It's so true. Yeah, I work with a lot of people. I mean, in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of people working on the spectrum, but also as a musician, I work with a lot of musical people who are on the spectrum and think and deliver what they want to say to me in very different ways that, like, if you weren't aware, you might be offended by the bluntness sometimes, but in fact, you learn to really value the bluntness. Like, just cut through it and just tell me exactly what it is. And you know this person is being brutally honest. It's amazing feedback as long as you can take it, right?
And I feel like too, it's not something that we can beat ourselves down. I think also the person has to be self-aware as well, because if you're trying to navigate a situation where you don't know what's going on, they don't also know what's going on, it becomes super tricky. So I think
Super tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, we do have so much testing available at such a decent, like it's accessible and it's free or nearly free, that we are all able to be more self-aware than we've ever been able to be. I think it's just, you know, a workplace encouraging and a family encouraging people to not self-analyze, but like to do a little more self-reflection, plus use some of the tools we've got out there to be more aware of your own tendencies and then the tendencies of people around you. Because it can be, my sister worked for the airport in Sydney as their sustainability person. She was very frustrated that every initiative she tried to deliver got slapped down by the girl that had the controlling vote in accounts. They all did a week of Myers-Briggs training with a professional Myers-Briggs person, and they had to have their Myers-Briggs profile on their desk. And Poppy, my sister, realized that the person she was dealing with wanted nitty-gritty detail, was a very detail-oriented thinker. My sister is a very big picture thinker. And so she'd been submitting all her proposals as big thinking visions. And what she realized was when she started submitting her proposal with nitty-gritty detailing, which she hated doing, everything got approved. It was literally understanding how the person that made the decision needed to receive the information in order to be able to make the call. So that's kind of interesting. All right.
Sally, it looks like we also, if we have time, there's another hand that's raised for a comment.
Oh, yes, please.
Feel free, Regina.
So hi, I have a question specific to I had posted about does the role that we have in our organizations or business have anything to do with our introverted or extroverted ways? And I ask that because I've been in a variety of roles and I'm a CEO now. So I'm not into the details as much as I was when I was a manager, you know, but it changes on, you know, sort of how we move. And so I'm just wondering how much the role we play require for specific introvert, extrovert activities.
That's a great question. I saw it in the chat too. It's fantastic. So I think there's a couple of things. First thing is with growth mindset, we know we're constantly changing. So as we have more experience, as you move through different roles, you're going to have different priorities and you are going to subtly shift. Possibly not in the way you like to receive your information. Possibly you still like it to be given to you in a vision or given to you in detail, depending. But the way we communicate is going to shift with experience and also with role expectations. I mean, there are, as I said, many leaders who consider themselves introverts, but many of the people that interact with them may consider them extroverts because those people put a little more effort or, you know, have an aspect where they do present in a very confident way, where they do come up with things really quickly. That may not be their comfort zone, but, you know, we are capable of amazing things. And I think our inherent preferences, we can totally power through with expertise, with our ability, with our creativity. We can totally nuance and change aspects of those preferences, you know. And I think definitely as we age and as we gain experience, we change. I mean, people that knew me in my 20s almost don't recognize me when they meet me now because they're like, you were so open and bubbly. And I'm like, well, kind of trying to listen more now, you know. Still sing really loudly, but I don't do it all the time, you know. So I think that's a really good observation that we do temper it with professionalism and with experience. All right, now I'm going to get to the bit that is controversial. Right, and that is my tool, the DeTest tool. Now, this is controversial because this is asking you to think about things you hate. And hate is a strong emotion. If we tap into, when we're brainstorming a system or a new idea, what we intensely dislike about that and not just constantly say yes and, we get some really interesting revelations and insights. And so we're going to practice the DeTest tool as groups, and it's going to be probably quite controversial. I'm just going to give you an example. But let's just start by saying, think of something in your daily life. It could be in your work. It could be just socially. It doesn't matter. Something that really annoys you. Just on the daily. It bugs you. Like there's something that just go, like, some people have said it's the barking dog next door. Some people have said people that don't say thank you. Whatever it is, just something that irks you, like just gets up inside and you just go, really? Right? And then I want you to write it down. All right, we all got something. Bear in mind, we're just practicing a tool, but it does in this case need to be something that twangs you emotionally in order for this tool to have some impact. Now, this bit. Right now, this is where we have to free think, and it is not enjoyable, but this is a really great practice because we are taking our brain to somewhere where it never goes. In fact, it works very, very competently to keep us way out of this zone. And I'm going to give you an example. Right, so now I want you to think of a solution to that problem that you detest. Like it would totally solve the problem. Maybe the barking dog gets put down, right? You just shot the dog. Something that bad, right? It solves the problem, but it is something that you would never in a million years consider as a viable option, either because it's illegal, it's not cool, you don't personally like it at all. And let me give you an example. So one of my Stanford classes I was running, one of the guys' pet hate was, he said, nobody listens to me at work. Right, so his detestable solution was I could drug them all so that everybody, but even as he said this, he's like, I can't believe I'm even saying it. We shouldn't even be thinking like this. And I'm like, it's good for your brain. It's okay. So then I say to his group, you all now have to take this concept of we could drug them into obedience and nuance it and massage it into a similar solution, but it is now acceptable and actually we want that solution, right? This is hard thinking. So he stood up and said, this is ridiculous. I will not be a part of this, and walked out, never to come back. But the rest of his group said, well, what are the drugs that make people obedient and make people happy and make people more amenable? Let's look for dopamine. Let's look for serotonin. How do we bring that into the workplace? Can we paint the walls a different color? Can we give people nutritional smoothies that actually make them more open and more healthy? Like, what can we do that's now legal and reasonable and actually admirable to have the same effect, to actually create an environment where people are much more conducive to saying yes than no? So the group came up with amazing solutions to this, but the dude never heard it because he never came back. Anyway, just thought I'd share that with you. Since we're sharing difficult things, I did lose a student that day, but it was really interesting because he couldn't think through that. And honestly, we can pretty much think through anything. And if we can, we enable ourselves with a kind of a creative confidence that lets us approach the unknown with confidence in our own ability, which is the point of this whole series. So think of a heinous solution. It solves the thing that bugs you, but it is not okay. Then we're going to go into our groups. And as a group, this is going to take the rest of the session. You're going to quickly run through your bad solution and what it solves quickly. As a group, you're going to choose the most controversial. And as a group, you're going to massage that into how can we look at that from different angles and achieve that in a way that is not only acceptable, but is really appealing and could be an amazing solution to an issue. Anyone got any questions before I put you in the rooms? All right, go for it. And then when you come back, I'm very keen to hear what went down. I might drop in and out of the rooms. Please just ignore me. I have FOMO if I don't drop into the rooms because I really like idea sharing, but I will not speak unless you've got a question, in which case Seek me out. I'm just lurking. All right, guys. Thank you. Shanae, let's put them in there. Controversial solutions. Let's go.
Right, and I just opened the rooms. And it's like we've got some people who started back joining. Welcome back, everyone. Just waiting on a few more people.
I'm curious as to how many of you turned the problem into a negative and then into a positive solution versus escalated it into an even worse and more heinous solution based on what I heard when I jumped into each of the rooms. I was like, oh, wow, they're really taking it to 11. Good thinking, guys. Group, who's in front of me? How did we go? I can't see everybody, so I'm just I've got a bunch of people in front of me. No, I can't see everybody. I just realized that. Okay, who can quickly share with me what went down in that group and what you guys came up with?
I'll go with one of ours. We talked about people who might lie in front of us. And our detestable solution was one of the detestable solutions was just, call them out on it. But our more workable solution was like some bad tasting jelly beans. And if they, lie in front of us, here's some jelly beans. You might want to rethink about what you said or something like that. You're just playing around with it.
Or you could have like one of those horns that goes, wah. You know how Pinocchio's nose grows?
We
Just
had
like have somebody in the room hit the thing. What's that game when you call liar? Is it liar? It's that thing when you're playing cards.
Oh, it's BS.
Yes, BS. Thank you for being polite about that. As an Australian, I would have said the whole word and offended half the room. So thank you. All right, did Jordan just put up a hand for, yes, Jordan.
Yeah, and our group, we were talking about people being unresponsive or hard to get a hold of. And our detestable solution was to drive to their house and just stand next to them and be like, answer my email. And our slightly more workable solution was like, just be a nice, authentic person and build a relationship with them and really understand like what's their motivation and have a carrot and a stick when you're reaching out, like CC their boss and also be nice to them.
And maybe get a time management person to come in and say, hey, listen, you clearly have too many emails because you never get back to me. So like, let's pay for someone to come and help you clear out the trash so you can attend to the urgent stuff.
Yeah. Can we hire everyone and an assistant? That would be great.
Nice. Donovan, thanks for sharing too, mate. I whipped to Jordan before I said thank you. I'm sorry about that. Have we got one other person that would like to share their heinous solution that was massaged into something vaguely less offensive? There were some funny sessions I was listening to there. There were some gripes.
Someone on our team said one of their family members chews with their mouth open, and that's one of their biggest pet peeves.
Oh,
so the initial solution would be to just tape their mouth every time they started like chewing with their mouth open. And then another solution was someone said that maybe they like start discussing just general pet peeves at the table, and then hopefully they'd get the hint. And then another solution was maybe that we consider the type of food they serve while that family member is around. So maybe it's soup instead of like any big like Thanksgiving dinner or something like that.
You get to liquefy all their food.
Exactly. So smoothies only.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Well, everybody, thank you for good discussions. Those the chat groups were really funny. I was cracking myself up with those. Which was awesome. Thank you. So that is Sideways. Hopefully you found some useful pieces there. It is often controversial, but it's also super useful because again, what we're trying to do is push you out of your default thinking, your default neural pathways, and prompt you to look at things from a different perspective and a different angle, consider different aspects. So I thank you all. Again, massive thanks to COACT. If you haven't joined the LinkedIn group and you feel like you want to share we're very, very keen to hear from you. Shanae would love to hear whether you think you're getting anything of value from me or whether I'm wasting your time. We'd appreciate that. I always love feedback. You can give me as much negative feedback as you want. I'm good for it. I'm a big girl. So anything you want to put either in the chat, on the LinkedIn group, maybe don't say like bad stuff about me on the LinkedIn group, but you can send it to Shanae. Anything you'd like more of, and then we will be sharing with you these slides. There's a recording, and we have 2 more sessions left. We have Thinking Backwards, which is about delivering systems, campaigns, anything faster, more economically with frugal innovation. That's a hard but a really useful one. And then finally, we're doing resilience, epic resilience, modern growth mindset. Thank you so much for giving me your time. I appreciate it. An hour and a half is a long time. Those who came back, thank you. Those who joined for the first time, thank you. Really, really do appreciate you sharing your time with me. And thank you, COACT. Okay, guys.
Thank you, Sally. And thank you, everyone. I did just launch a poll. If you can just quickly give us any immediate feedback. These are some of the questions in the LinkedIn group, but we'll just love to know how you feel so far in terms of engaging with others, in terms of the length of breakout rooms, and just any tools that you're learning. So if you can just share with us your feedback for the poll before you head out, we would greatly appreciate it. We look forward to connecting with you all again soon. Thank
Yes.
you.
See you later.
Charnay, quick
Thank you.
quick comment, Charnay. On the Pulse poll, the last question says, do you desire more or less time in the breakout rooms? And so if you want to determine, and it just says yes or no. So if you want more to be yes or less to be no, then you can maybe know
Good.
what.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. Thank you. I
of
wanna make sure
course.
everybody knows. Awesome. Thank you so much for everybody for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day.